My grandpa, a retired homicide detective, just told me the case that still keeps him up at night. He was a detective for 27 years of his life, and I grew up listening to the tales of he and his fellow lawmen. As a child, he obviously amended the stories quite a bit to make them age appropriate, but as I grew up, more and more of the true stories came out. Starting about 2 years ago, my grandpa got sick. He's been on a slow decline ever since, and while it's been one of the hardest things I've ever had to deal with, his illness acted as the catalyst for a set of stories he'd never before brought up. He said he kept them filed away deep in the folder he doesn't like to open. He calls them the impossible ones. But this last one, the one he told me last night, he says it's the one that still keeps him up some nights, the one he thinks about every day. He said he's looked over the case files more times than he can remember, done a full re-examination of it all more times than he can remember, and it never makes any more sense. He said he only told me now because he can feel in his bones that he doesn't have a lot of time left. I recorded him telling me the story, so what follows is my transcription of the case, verbatim. I've only excluded his coughing fits and any off-topic remarks made during the telling of the case. The case was a murder/kidnapping, at least that's what it looked like, and it was me and Olson. I've told you about it. There was a family, the Nabels. There was Benjamin, the husband, Jennifer, the wife, and Katie, their 6-year-old daughter. One of their neighbors had gone out for the paper around 6 a.m. and saw the Nebels' front door wide open. When she went over to see if everything was okay, she saw the wife's body. The neighbor called 911 and eventually we were sent over there. Now, when I say there was no outward signs of a struggle, I mean it. There was no sign whatsoever that anything had happened, well, except for the dead body. But even her body, there were no wounds, no marks of any kind. I'm getting ahead of myself. On our way to the house, it came over the radio that the husband and daughter were unaccounted for. If you're thinking the husband did it, we did too, obviously. Problem was, both the family's cars were still in the garage. So we think they might be on foot. Some officers canvassed the neighborhood, and no one had seen them, including 2 neighbors that were on their porches for hours starting in the early morning. No one had heard any kind of commotion coming from their house, either. I mentioned the wife's body. She didn't have a hair out of place. She was on her back in the kitchen, about a third of her upper body was under the table. We found out after the autopsy that, well, she just died. There was no cause that they could find. She'd been a perfectly healthy woman, didn't smoke, didn't drink, ate right, exercised. It was like she just blinked her eyes and gone from alive to dead. Anyways, we searched the house. We went through it with a fine-tooth comb, basement to attic, found nothing. No evidence of a struggle, no weapon, nothing. So we left. We'd spent hours in that house, thought maybe we should come back in a day or two with some fresh eyes. We went over to where Benjamin worked. He was a supervisor at a lumber yard. According to his coworkers, he'd shown up at work that morning just before 5 a.m. when he got and he worked on this narrow crate thing he was building in his office, something he told his coworkers was a project for his house. According to the other morning supervisor, he'd only built about half of the thing. Around 6:15, he said he was running to the bathroom, and that was the last anyone saw him. They never saw him leave. While we were at the lumber yard I realized I'd left my notes at the house. We drove back over there, and we got there while they were taking the wife's body away. As soon as we walked in, the stench hit us like a bus. It was what a newly discovered but long dead body smells like. We knew it obviously couldn't have been the wife. We asked a few of the officers and forensics folks that were still at the house what the smell was, and they told us that it had only started a few minutes before we'd gotten back there. I'm not